Hello and welcome again. So in this time around, I'm going to be taking a look at something known as conditionals or branching. So what these allow us to do is they allow us to have our code make decisions. So our code can choose to do one action or it can do another action. So for example, we could have things there where we're checking, is the player's health below a certain amount? And if it is, we could play a particular sound. We could check if the player has entered a certain location. And if they are in that spot, then we could again play another sound, have some reaction happen. So it's any time we want something to happen only in response to particular conditions. That's where we can use these things called conditionals. So let's dive in and get one set up. So again, I'm going to be creating a project from scratch. As I've said in these early ones, I really want to be going through and repeating this a few times, just so that folks are super comfortable with that. So this project is going to be looking at conditionals. And I've gone for a 3D one. I would be able to do this as a 3D or 2D one. That's not going to matter too much with it. So we'll create that and then we'll be able to get up and running with it. So we're going to look at a few different things. We're going to look at creating some very simple conditionals where we're just checking one condition and then we're either doing one thing or another. But we're also going to look at more complicated versions there where we might be checking multiple conditions, where we can actually start to combine stuff. So we want to do something where either one condition is happening or another condition is happening. So that process of being able to combine things is something we're going to be looking at. As part of this, we're going to be doing a lot of working with variables. So this will also be a chance for us to dive a lot more into variables to see the kinds of things that they allow us to do actually be doing there and be able to get up and running with that. Right, so we've got an empty project, so we're going to need a few things to be able to be starting to test with our conditionals. So, as always, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get set up. So we've got a folder to put scripts in. Again, just making sure I name things logically to begin with makes things a lot easier further down the track. So this I am just going to call conditionals demo, remembering to not have spaces in the file names there because that will make Unity not be able to actually see the content of that file. And I'm also, what I'm going to do is I'm going to chuck in a queue. Just like that, and this is going to have the demo script attached onto it because what that gives me is something that's there in the environment that I can move around and I can key some of the conditions off of that moving around. So let's start to think of some simple conditions that we might want to have. So I said we could look at moving around and aspects like that, and I think that's a good starting point. So let's have it that we have a ceiling height for the cube. Because one of the things we did last time in the intro to scripting one is we had the cube move up. So let's maybe make it that it moves up, but only until it hits a particular point. So, similar to last time, I'm going to set up a vector 3 that controls the cube's movement. So this will be the movement per frame. And what I am going to do is, firstly, I'm just going to set it up exactly like I had previously, where I'm taking the current position and I'm making that current position equal to my position plus the movement per frame. And I'll set that movement per frame to a really low value, and we'll test it initially. And what we would expect initially is that it will move outside of the range of the screen, and we won't actually be able to see it anymore. So let's make that a really small movement, and we go and read, and we should see it fly up in the air, and cool. So that's what we wanted. So let's make it now, though, that it only can do this if it is below a particular height. So let's set this up. We want to, so what we can actually do is I can say if. So one of our main, most commonly used type of condition we're using is something called an if statement. So we're checking if something is the case, if that condition is met, what we would refer to as the condition being true. So we can say if transform dot position dot y. So we can use this syntax of something dot something else. So that's a common thing that we'll encounter in code, that one thing is made up of many other things. Because transform holds a position, it holds a rotation, and it holds a scale. But those positions, rotations, and scales are made up of three separate things as well. So the position has an x value, a y value, and a z value. So by using dot, I can actually access those. So in this case, I'm saying I want to access the transform that this code is running on. And I want to access the position within that and the y value within that. So what I could say is if the transform.position.y is less than, and let's make a fairly small amount. Let's say it's less than 2. Now, we're dealing with floating points, so we must use f there at the end, is good practice to get into. And then I just want to indent that for clarity. Now, normally, you can actually have, and you'll see this as the general way that they often get written, there'll be braces there. And early on, I'm going to pretty consistently do that. We'll have a look at what the impact is in a moment between having braces there and not. But so what I'm saying is if my position, the y value of that is less than 2, then it is allowed to run this code. Otherwise, it will not try and change it. So as soon as the y position is above 2, it will stop trying to change it. So what should happen is the cube moves up and then hits a point where it stops moving. So let's try and run this and we'll see how that looks. So it's playing, moves up and it stops. And it stopped. So it was able to, and this is the thing, floating point numbers are not super precise. There's a little bit of an error there. So what would have happened is we had a value that was 1.99, likely with even more nines after that, and it was able to just clip over into 2. But that's okay. So that's kind of cool. We can have it move up, but what if we want to have it not be able to go too low, because that's just going to stop it from moving up. If I change this to negative, then what would happen is it can still go off the screen because I'm just checking that it's less than 2 and it's still less than 2. It's 30 meters below and it's still less than 2, and this will just keep going. So, okay, I need to be able to do something better then if I want to have it be restricted there and it only staying within between 2 and -2. Now I've got a couple of ways of doing this. One of the ways, a more verbose way of doing it, but this is the thing early on, I'm going to be going for more verbose ways of doing a lot of these things. The reason being is that the more verbose ways are a bit clearer to understand. Now, it's completely okay for you using really verbose methods and you using them for a long period of time. It's more important that you're able to make the logic do what you need than that the code is the most efficient that it can be. Efficiency and quality of code will come in time. It will come with practice. For now, focus on making it do what you need it to do. If to get it to do what you need it to do, it is the most horrendously messy code. It is held together by duct tape and just a lot of goodwill. That's fine. What matters is that it works, that it does what you're needing it to do. That's the most important thing with it. So we've got our setup here, and we'll go for a more verbose version of this first. So we can put an if statement inside another, what's called nesting. So this, I can check if the transform position y is greater than -2. And again, I'll bring this into here and indent it. So now this code, for it to run, our transform positions y has to be greater than -2. It also, because for that check to even happen, this first check has to pass. So it has to be between 2 and -2. So I'm going to put in a comment here. Only update the position if the y value is between -2 and 2. So let's see what that does. Because this should give us something where its position is effectively clamped, that its position can increase and it can decrease, but as we can see, only by a certain amount. So it'll be able to increase. Now what it's hitting into here is, because it's managed to go just ever so slightly past 2. So that's not really an ideal thing. We want to be a little bit better than that. So what we could do is we could check if the new position would actually be out of range. So we don't move it to something that is outside of that clamped range. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually duplicate this code. And I'm going to comment out this first one, because I want to keep both sets of code so you can see exactly how these actually work. So this one, I can use some brackets here, and I can say, well, if the transform position y plus the movement per frame dot y, because movement per frame is a vector 3, it has x, y, and z. I can access it. So this will do the maths. This will check and see, well, okay, if I did this movement, is it still within that range? And I can do the same thing here. If I do this movement, is it still within that range? So it means now that, whereas with this one, if my movement per frame was too large or just even due to floating point inaccuracies, I can get to the point where then it becomes locked. It actually goes out of those ranges and then is stuck. Whereas this version will not be able to get stuck. So let's see what happens with this version. This version, I should be able to change my movement per frame as much as I want, and it'll be fine. I can even go really overboard and say, I want you to be moving 100 every frame. And whereas with the other one, it would actually move to -98. With this one, it won't, because it knows that that will be invalid. But I can use -1, but then it won't tick it over any further because it can see that that would go past the limits that we've got. So if statements, we can use them for doing some simple checking here. So this one I'm going to put in comment so that we know the issue here as the issue that it can go out of bounds if movement per frame is large enough. Cannot go out of bounds. So that's cool, but we can do better, because I said that there's simpler ways of writing this. So let's look at a couple of simpler ways of writing this, because we can nest if statements like this, absolutely. And that's completely fine to be setting them up like this. This is a way of checking if this condition is met and this condition is met. And that and is the key aspect there to this. That we're making sure both conditions are true. So the other way that we can do this is, what we can do So we can say if, and we grab our first condition here, and then we can combine this into a single line. Because what I can then do is double ampersand and the second condition. So this double ampersand means and. So double ampersand equals and. So both conditions must be met. So this is doing the same thing as above here. So this is this, and this is the version 2. This is version 1 of it. This one's kind of the not good version. This is the bad version, and there will be a version 3 that we look at. So I'm going to again bring this over, and then I'm going to again comment out this one. But I'll keep all of these. So when the code that goes up on GitHub, you'll have all of these different versions there. So this will work the exact same. But the reason why early on I'd encourage going more for this approach is because this is easier to read. This kind of setup is okay if you've been doing coding for long enough that this is fairly straightforward to pass. Early on, this is a lot, and you need to potentially be relying on it's showing me where the brackets are. So it's more complicated in terms of the syntax for it. So if you're able to get your code working and it looks like this, cool. That's a good point, and that is a point to be happy at. So let's test this, make sure that it actually does do the same thing and I'm not making stuff up. So we'll test this, and yep, so that works. I can test to make sure that works. So yeah, got a version there that works. So that's pretty cool, but it's messy. We can simplify this a little bit more. So we can simplify it by making use of some additional helper functions that exist is another approach. So what I'm going to do in this case is, so I know because it's going to be bound between 2 and -2, if I could get rid of that minus, so if I could make any time when it's negative, it's just actually the positive version of that. So -1.1 becomes positive 1.1. I could write this a lot easier. And there's a way of doing that. There's a way that strips away the negatives from things, and that's something called the absolute value. So what I could do is mathf.abs, so for absolute value, and I work out the absolute value of what my new y value would be, and I check that that is less than 2. And then in that case, I do the updating of the position. So there will often be ways of simplifying your code. And it's okay to write the complex version first. There's nothing wrong with writing the complex version first, especially if writing the more complex, more verbose version is simpler, is faster for you to do. That's fine. Because what matters is having it be functional, and then afterwards we make it that it is better performance, that it might be more efficient, more flexible. That's okay. It's not about getting it perfect first time. So this version of the code, if you have to write this version, if you have to write this version and then change it to this, and then change it to this, and then get to this version, that's fine. That's good. So don't feel that not being able to just directly jump to this means that you're bad at coding. It doesn't. It means you're in the early stages of coding. And that's okay, because with time, with practice, with experience, you will be able to jump direct to this. But there will still be things where more complex conditions, because we can get pretty complex with these conditions, where you might need to write out the verbose version first, and that's okay. So let's test this, make sure this version, again, works. It's always good to make sure you test that the code works, and really, really want to emphasize that. Never just assume that your code is going to work. Make sure you test it. So that's doing pretty good. That's working well. But I've had to put in, I've what we would say hard-coded a value here, and or used a magic number. So hard coding of values is not great, because if I needed to go and change this then from a 2 to, whatever other value, I need to go and find where that is in the code. Now, in this case, it's pretty simple. It's just in one spot. But you can imagine on large projects, you might need to refer to that particular hard-coded number many, many, many times. You could have other things that use the exact same number, which can make it really hard to spot or track down, the particular ones you need to update. So there's a potential of errors there. There's a lot of problems that we can run into with it. So what we want to do is we want to look at ways of being able to not hard code this stuff. And that's where we can use something called a variable. So we've seen a little bit already with variables. We're using ones here in terms of our movement per frame. We can also then set up one that this might be our y bounds. And I'm going to set that to be equal to 2. So that's pretty good. We've got y bounds. But what would be nice is then changing this. So I'm going to copy this because I want to keep each of these progressive ones so that we've got all of these. Version 3a now with variables. So what we can do is we can just change where we had 2f to y bounds. And then this is going to make sure that it is between minus y bounds and y bounds. So we can come back here and we'll see our variable will appear here in the inspector. So we can test it and we'll see it moves down, which is cool. But then we could change our y bounds here. So we could make it 3. And then it will move to be that larger bound. So it means now those bounds, we can be changing them and we don't need to go and update the code when we actually change those bounds, which is great. It makes the process of updating things a lot easier. So that's stuff we can do with some simple conditions there where we're moving stuff. And this is one of the common things where we use sort of these conditionals is putting limits on things. But we can do more than that. We could do stuff where it is activating something based on multiple different conditions. So we're going to end up setting up another script for that. And this is going to be conditionals demo 2. Because remember, we can have numbers as long as they're not at the start. That is also going to go onto our cube. So we can have multiple scripts there, and then we're going to open that up. Okay, so we want to do some more intricate logic here, because we've seen a little bit with AND statements for connecting things, but let's see what else we can do there with that. So I am going to make it that we're going to give this a couple of things. So I've mentioned we have floating points, and I've also mentioned integers. It's time to actually show some usage of those. So I'm going to bring in an integer here, and I'm going to call it the character health, and I'm going to make that 100. I might, I think that's a good sort of starting point. I'm actually going to just chuck in another one that is character food level. So how much food we're carrying with us. And we're going to make that 0. So we mentioned, we could do things when health, stuff like that, goes below particular values. So let's have a look at that. We could have f, my character health, is below. Now, I might go and hard code that in, but that's not great. So let's have a low health threshold. And that's going to be, let's say 50. So if we're below 50, so I want to check if the character health is below the low health threshold, then we could do something. So we could have a message that is health low. So that would work. But maybe we want to tell them to actually eat then at that point. So we could be checking if the character's food level is greater than 0, then we could put out a message that says, eat food now, please. So we could be doing that. And you'll notice here, I've done a single line. I haven't put any braces. So we can actually do that. You only need braces after an if statement if you are grouping multiple lines. If it's just a single line, you don't actually need the braces. And I could put a debug log here, not part of food level check. This would always run, regardless of what the food level is. So only the line of code immediately after the if statement gets run, unless we use braces. So the general rule there is use braces if you have multiple lines that you are grouping. Otherwise, you can just use a single line. Early on, again, similar to the structuring of these, if early on you need to use multiple braces all the time, that's okay. Again, with time, with experience, with practice, you'll reach a point where you feel comfortable with, in some cases, just having a single line like that, and that's okay. So I'm going to comment that out for now, so it's not too spammy. So let's check and see. If we run this, and I'm going to bring up the console so we can see the messages. So I've got my character health. If I bring my character health down, so I can just slowly lower it. So I'm getting these health low messages, but I don't get the food ones until now I've got food there. So that's cool. I reckon we can do more than this though. We can check other particular things. So, because we might want to eat if we are low on health, but we might also want to eat if we're hungry. So let's set up a character hunger level. And that might start at 0. And again, I'm going to need another threshold. So is hungry threshold. And that's going to be, it's not going to kick in until around 50. So we could then set up a thing here where, okay, well, if the character food level is, greater than 0, and the character hunger level is greater than the is hungry threshold. So I'm checking multiple conditions. Then we could say eat now, please. And you'll notice here, I didn't put parentheses around these. You don't technically have to. I will typically always do that. The reason I always do that is because it means that when I look at it, it's very clear what is happening. So now we've got multiple different messages that we could be receiving. So let's run this up and let's see how this goes. So we're going to be playing it. So first of all, let's make sure the character has food. And if we go and make them so that they are hungry, we start and we can see those messages coming out about, now let's say they've taken damage. then we're getting all of the messages coming out. And that could be a little bit messy. That could be a bit spammy. If we're activating audio, things like that from these, that could get really messy and annoying for the player there. So we might want to look at prioritizing these. So we might want to say that if the character's health is below the low health threshold, then that particular set of messages has priority. And we only do this hungry check if we're above that low health threshold. So I could set this up as, okay, well, if the character health is greater than or equal to the low health threshold, then do the other one. So I could absolutely do that. Or I've got another approach. I can say else. So what happens with an else, and there's two different ways that I can set this up. So this is the first method. So what this is saying is if this condition is met, so if the character health is less than the low health threshold, then we will run the code here. Otherwise, we will run the code here. So this runs the block below if the first condition, so I'm going to put the condition in there so we can see that first condition is not met. True. So first condition is check if health is below low health threshold. Do we have food? This one is checking have food and we're hungry. And this is the kind of comments I would typically be putting in. So they give a bit of an indication of what's happening, things like that. So this, now what we'll find is we've got a prioritization happening there, where if we are hungry, and so let's give us some food and we're hungry, so the priority is putting out the hungry message. But if our health goes down, then the priority, we stop seeing the hungry message and we start seeing the ones related to health. So using if with else allows us to have some more complicated logic there and allows us to have more intricate things that we're checking. So that's pretty cool. And that's working, pretty nicely. We can actually sort of check other things though. So maybe, we've got a low health threshold. What if we had a max health? And that's, 100. And this first time we go below that, we want to put up a message. So we have another check that, because we've already got an else there, we don't want to put many things in here. What we can do is we can do else if character health is less than the max health threshold. So we can say, this could be a great time to put up a message. Eating food will recover health. So that's cool. So this will check this condition first. If that condition is not met, it will then check this condition. If this condition is met, it will run this code and only this code. Otherwise, it will run the code here. So anytime this runs, it will only be able to run either this first block, the second block, or the third. It will never run all three, or more than one actually. It will only ever run one of these. And we can see how this then behaves. So we'll, as before, we'll make sure that the character has got some food, and then their health drops, so we get that initial message. Once it drops below 50, we get the low health message. We'll make the character super hungry, but we don't see that message till the health ticks back up over our thresholds, and we're able to then display our particular messages. Let's make sure we've got plenty of food. So we're still getting that health message though, because our character health is not back up at full. So we need to go back up to full, because one of the things we said was we only wanted that message to come out once. So it's a good time to use another variable. So I'm going to set up a bool has shown health tutorial. And that's going to be false. So Booleans we use often with things like if statements. A Boolean can either be true or false. So yes or no. So we haven't shown it. So the first thing we do here then is when we go to when we've shown it, we set that to be true. So now we know we've shown it. And then our else if here, we can check if has shown health tutorial is false and the character health is less than that threshold, so that we won't see it be spamming out. So have we shown that tutorial? If we and we set it to true. So this is a common syntax you'll see, checking a particular Boolean and setting it immediately. Because what should happen now is before, when we go, we'll start off with the similar scenario what we had before. We've got food. We will make the character take a little bit of damage. We get the message, but only once. We drop down below the point, so it's starting to spam out the messages. We then go back above our low health threshold, and now the character's hungry. So whereas before, this didn't start accumulating until we were back up at full health, now this just starts accumulating as soon as we're above the low health threshold. So again, this is the kind of things we can be doing with conditionals. They can, things that we can be checking, we can also be changing them within that. And I could do this for other ones here. I could set up so all of them become one-shot ones effectively. And this is something where I'm really big on encouraging folks to experiment with code. That's a great kind of experimentation that you could do there, of taking this and then making it so that all of the messages might only display once. That would be a really cool thing to be doing there. So, okay, that's kind of cool. We've got this sort of set up. Okay, we've used and a lot. What if we want to do something where it's either one case or it's also another case? So, maybe we want to do something if we are low on health, or if we are low on food. We might want to display for a combination of different things. So let's think about something we could check here. Maybe we are out of food. So if our food level is, let's say if it's less than 10, or our character health is less than 10, then a debug message, this is probably real bad. We're not in a good state if either of those things are the case. And again, putting parentheses around these just to group it. So if low on food or low on health, display a warning. So the double pipe is an or symbol. So we have and, double ampersand, and we have or. So let's see what happens with this now. We can run it, and our food level is already low, so we're already getting messages. So let's chuck our food level up a bit. But our health, the player's going to have taken a whole bunch of damage. And that is causing the message to show up as well. So it will display if one of the conditions is met. Now, that could get real messy. So maybe we want to limit how often we're showing that. Has shown things are bad tutorial. So we only want to then display this, we know from what we did here, okay, well, we want to set this to true. But if I just put in here, so let's put in the thing that would be really easy to write at the moment, has shown things are bad, it's equal to false, and. So let's do that. Because what we're aiming for is it only shows up once. But let's see if that actually is what will happen. Will it only show up once? So we're running. We're getting the low food message, so that's good. It only showed up once with that. Let's bring the health down to below the, oh. So now it's still appearing. And that is because there is an order that these happen in. So this is going to be, this has shown things a bad tutorial. That is going to, after this is run once, is going to be evaluating to true. So if we map out what the conditions are looking like, this condition here initially runs and it's true, but afterwards, this is false. So we're saying false and character food level is less than 10, so that's true, or true. Now, we haven't put any brackets in here, so these evaluate left to right. So false ended with true is false. Because we're saying, the only way that that can evaluate as true is if both of those are true. So this is false, but we're then saying, well, if this thing's false or this thing's true, then it would run. And that's where the problem comes in. We haven't grouped stuff. All we need to do is put these in parentheses. Now it's saying if we haven't shown the tutorial and either one of these cases is met. So we can be combining multiple things like this. And what we'll see now is we will only ever get one of that message coming through. We won't get multiple of it appearing. So let's run this. We'll see, we'll get the food one. Let's tank the player's health. And we get the other messages that we knew we would get. We don't get any more of this. So we can combine Boolean logic there. So this is what's called Boolean logic. We can combine that to get more complicated effects. So that's pretty cool. And I'm going to show one last thing that's kind of a neat little shortcut. So let's say we have something where we want to set a particular value based upon something. So we might want to have, a desire for food. Desire for food. And that might, let's say that that's 0. Maybe we want to have it that if we're hungry, so if the character hunger level is greater than is hungry, we might want to make that desire for food to be 10. Maybe we also want to make it, though, if they are low on health, that's even higher, for example. Or let's start with a simple thing. Maybe they just want to have them always desire food a bit. So we could have it that there's always just a little bit of background desire for food, or we could have in a is super hungry threshold. Let's go with that. So if our character hunger level is above the is super hungry one, then we'll say that their desire for food is 10. Else, if the character's hunger level is greater than the is hungry threshold, their desire for food is 5. Otherwise, it's 0. So that's a kind of cool setup. And again, this is illustrating skipping having braces around these because they are single lines. So this, I'm setting the desired food, or desire for food, based on hunger level. So that's cool, but this is version 1 of it. And we will display this out. So I can display variables with my debug logs. So desire for food is that. Let's see how that looks. So we should see as we progress through different hunger levels, we get different messages appearing. I'm sticking with collapse on just to make it easier. So desire for food is 1. Let's make the character a bit hungry. So it's now 5. Let's make them super hungry. So cool, that's working. Let's look at a different way of doing this. So this is version 1 of it. Here's the other way we can do this. We could say desire for food is equal to, and we're going to check this first condition, and I'm going to put it in brackets. I don't strictly need to, but again, for neatness I do, and for ease of readability. So if we're checking a condition, I'm doing question mark 10, otherwise 5. And let's see what this does. So it's not going to do exactly what we need yet, but we'll be able to see how we can make it do that. So we want to see that it's at least doing something. So getting desire for food is 5. Tick over past 75. So we're getting the 5 and 75 happening there. So this is something called the ternary operator. The ternary operator, and using ternary operator, which is the question mark there. So what it does is it checks this condition. If this condition is true, then it will use the first value, otherwise the second. So it's a shortcut way of setting a value. And to get the equivalent of the one above, what I would do is, in this case here, it would be 5. Change that, and that goes to our 5 or 1, and that is checking the hungry threshold. So this is doing the exact same as this, but using the ternary operator. So version 2, ternary operator. Again, early on, this code is absolutely fine. If months from now you are still writing this version of code, cool. What matters is that it's working. That's the important thing with this. It's not that you can just immediately go and run to this, because this is something that is much more difficult to read. It's shorter, it's quicker to write, but it is more difficult to read. So it's okay that if this is not a version that you're writing for a very long time, because what matters is that it works. And I'm going to keep that version, and I'm going to test this, and we should see we get the similar results to what we were getting before. Start raising my hunger level. Food desires 5 goes up to 10. So recapping the things that we've looked at. When we want our code to do different things, when we want it to branch, we use conditionals. Most common one there being an if statement. And we write a condition and it goes between parentheses. And if that condition is met, then it runs the code after it. If we're using braces, then it runs every line of code after it that's within those braces. Otherwise, if we're just not using braces, it'll just run the next line. We can put one if statement inside of another. So it checks the first condition and then the second one. So we can use that as a test there. We saw that we can be checking a value, the value that we would set something to before we actually set it, so that we're not going out of range. We can use things like a double ampersand to join conditions. So rather than nesting, we can check all of them in the same if statement, the same check. We saw that we could use things like ABS to remove the minus sign from something, to strip that away and make the variable positive. We also saw when we're checking values, it's great to be able to be using a variable for that, so that we're not hard coding in magic numbers into our projects. We saw doing things like using an OR statement to be able to check if it's one condition or another, and using that in combination with things like AND, so that we can be testing more complex scenarios. We saw using things like variables to make sure that something only happens once. And we saw how to use things like the ternary operator, so that we can do quick little conditionals when we're actually setting a particular variable. So there are things that you could be doing to experiment with this, and something that I'd really, really recommend there is be grabbing code like this and experiment with it. You're not going to be able to break your computer with it. If something goes wrong, that's fine. You can always grab a fresh copy of the code and use the fresh copy there. If you end up having to delete it, if you have to delete it 50 times, but in that process you've experimented, you've learned things, cool, that's great. That's what you want to be doing with this stuff. So just focus on grabbing the code, experimenting with it, and going from there. Thanks folks, that is all for this video. If you're looking for the project, you'll be able to find it up on GitHub, and I've put a link to that in the description below. If you've got any feedback, any questions, please chuck in a comment. And if you're looking to find ways to support the channel, chucking in a like or subscribing to the channel is always a big help. If you're looking to go further than that, then I do have a Patreon set up, and any support there is super appreciated. And there's a bunch of different things that you'll get as part of being a patron there. And the big thing is it's going to help me make more cool things like this, which is going to help more people like yourself to be making more games, which is awesome. And that is all for now. Thank you.